Daniel turned away from his mother as whispers spread through the crowd. "She looks like a beggar," someone muttered. Humiliated, she stood silently, her heart breaking as she watched the son she sacrificed everything for push her aside. But when she took the microphone, the shocking secret she revealed left everyone speechless. What happened next shattered their perfect day and changed Daniel's life forever. At the height of Daniel's wedding, whispers echoed through the hall, soft but cutting. The guests, all dressed in their finest, exchanged glances of pity and disdain. Daniel stood tall in his polished designer suit, but his blue eyes betrayed his unease. He glanced toward his mother, Catherine, standing near the back, wearing her modest, outdated dress. Her presence, once a source of pride, now seemed to remind him of the life he had desperately tried to leave behind. He turned his back on her, silently signaling his decision to distance himself from his past. "She looks like a beggar," one of the guests whispered to another, the words slicing through the quiet like a blade. The murmur spread quickly through the crowd, each guest casting furtive, judgmental glances toward Catherine. She stood quietly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her expression stoic. Yet beneath the surface, her heart ached. She had sacrificed everything for her son, and now, on his most important day, she was reduced to a source of embarrassment and shame. Her presence, which should have been celebrated, was now being mocked. Catherine watched as her son, the boy she had raised with so much love and care, deliberately pushed her aside, choosing his new life over her. Her heart shattered in silence, her brown eyes filled with a deep, unspoken sorrow. She didn't need to hear the whispers to know what they thought of her. Her modest attire stood in stark contrast to the grandeur of the event, a symbol of everything she had given up for him. But she stood still, refusing to show the hurt that burned inside her. Gathering all the strength she had left, Catherine slowly approached the microphone. Her steps were deliberate, her posture resolute. The room fell into a hushed silence as all eyes turned to her, expecting nothing more than a quiet, defeated retreat. But when she spoke, her voice was steady, clear, and full of purpose. What she said next would not only shock the room but alter the course of Daniel's life forever. The secret she had carried for so long was finally being revealed, and it was more devastating than anyone could have imagined. The moment Catherine finished speaking, the air in the room grew thick with tension. The joyous celebration had turned into something unrecognizable. Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing to process what he had just heard. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his success, his mother's role in it all, had been turned upside down. What had been a perfect day was now shattered, and in that moment, he realized how blind he had been. The truth had come crashing down, and nothing would ever be the same. Years earlier, Catherine stood outside their modest home, watching as Daniel hurried to school. She clutched her worn-out bag, preparing for another long day of work. Her face reflected a mix of pride and exhaustion, knowing that all her efforts were for him. She wore the same clothes day after day, choosing to spend her earnings on Daniel's future instead of her own needs. Inside their humble home, Catherine sat at the kitchen table late at night, working on extra jobs to make ends meet. The light in the room was dim, but her focus never wavered. Her eyes, though tired, were filled with determination as she sewed clothes for neighbors or balanced bills, determined to provide Daniel with the best education possible. Catherine would glance at the family photo on the wall, a reminder of the days when her late husband was still with them. She missed him dearly but carried on for their son's sake. Her sacrifices, from selling personal belongings to working multiple jobs, remained unnoticed by Daniel, who was too focused on his studies and friends to realize the weight she carried. Even on weekends, Catherine never rested. She took on additional tasks, from cleaning houses to running errands for others, ensuring that every opportunity for Daniel's success was secured. Her hands were calloused from work, but her heart was strong, driven by the hope that one day, Daniel would achieve everything she dreamed for him. There were moments when Catherine longed for recognition, for Daniel to understand the depth of her sacrifices. But she never voiced these desires, choosing instead to focus on his future. Her only reward was seeing him thrive, but deep down, she carried the silent pain of being overlooked, even as she gave her all to see him succeed. Daniel sat with his mother, his eyes alight with excitement as he spoke about his future. He shared his grand ambitions, telling her how he would rise above their modest beginnings. Catherine listened quietly, her face tired but filled with quiet pride. She had worked so hard to give him this chance, and hearing his dreams made her sacrifices feel worth it. As Daniel continued to talk, Catherine smiled, but her hands rested on her lap, revealing the wear of years of labor. She was proud of his determination, but also worried. He seemed more focused on success and status than on the hard work and values she had tried to instill in him. Daniel's voice grew louder as he described the life he envisioned, one of luxury and recognition. He talked about leaving behind their small life, eager to prove himself to the world. Catherine's smile faded slightly, realizing that his focus had shifted away from the values of humility and perseverance she had once taught him. Over time, Daniel's attention turned more toward impressing others. He cared deeply about how he was perceived, striving to meet the expectations of his peers and superiors. The love for learning and hard work that once fueled him seemed to take a back seat to his desire for validation from the outside world. Catherine remained silent, observing her son's growing obsession with external success. She feared that in chasing recognition, Daniel was losing sight of the deeper values that had sustained their family through difficult times. Yet, she didn't want to hold him back, torn between supporting his dreams and protecting him from the potential dangers of losing himself. Daniel stood in a luxurious room, surrounded by well-dressed colleagues and friends. They laughed and exchanged stories of success, their polished appearances mirroring the wealth and affluence that Daniel had worked so hard to attain. But amid the laughter, a comment about his past seemed to bring a sudden stiffness to his smile. One of the affluent guests casually mentioned Daniel's modest upbringing, a detail that caused an uncomfortable shift in his posture. His shoulders tensed, and for a brief moment, he was no longer the confident man who had conquered the business world, but the boy from a small, humble home. The conversation quickly moved on, but the seed of discomfort had been planted. Daniel felt a growing unease whenever his mother was mentioned in these social circles. He began to avoid discussing his past entirely, fearing judgment or pity from those who couldn't understand where he came from. Despite his success, the subtle pressure from his new social environment began to strain his relationship with his mother. He found himself visiting her less frequently, feeling conflicted between his loyalty to her and his desire to fit into his new world. The pride he once felt about his humble beginnings now seemed like a burden he couldn't easily shake. Catherine, ever perceptive, sensed the distance forming between them. She didn't fully understand why her son was pulling away, but the tension was undeniable. Her heart ached as she watched him drift further from the values they once shared, as the weight of social pressure subtly but steadily pulled them apart. Daniel nervously approached his mother, inviting her to a dinner where she would meet his fiancée's wealthy family. His voice, though kind, hinted at concern as he gently suggested she dress up a bit to blend in with the crowd he had come to know. Catherine, eager to support her son and meet his future in-laws, tried her best. She dressed in her finest clothes, ones she had saved for special occasions, but as she looked in the mirror, a shadow of doubt crossed her face. She wasn't sure if her effort would meet Daniel's expectations. At the gathering, Catherine felt out of place. The lavish setting and the elegant, expensive outfits worn by the other guests only heightened her self-consciousness. She tried to engage in polite conversation, but the awkwardness was palpable. Her hands fidgeted with her modest purse, betraying her discomfort. Daniel, sensing the unease in the room, grew increasingly tense. Each glance from his fiancée's family seemed to weigh on him. His attempts to mask his embarrassment only made the situation worse, as the distance between him and his mother became more apparent. By the end of the evening, the tension between mother and son was undeniable. Catherine had done everything she could to make him proud, but Daniel's growing shame over his background left both of them feeling disconnected and hurt, a gap that no elegant outfit could bridge. Daniel, now deeply embedded in high society, began making choices that pushed him further away from his mother. His new life demanded appearances, and soon he found himself making decisions that he knew would hurt her. Each move towards status and wealth seemed to widen the emotional gap between them. At a pre-wedding event Catherine attended, hopeful but unaware of the judgment she would face. The bride's family, subtle at first, showed clear disapproval of her modest attire and humble presence. Their whispers, though quiet, were impossible to ignore, and the weight of their disdain became unbearable for Catherine. The growing tension was too much for Daniel. Embarrassed by how his mother was perceived in his new world, he started avoiding her calls. With each ignored message, the shame he felt over his background only deepened, leading him to further distance himself from the woman who had sacrificed so much for him. Catherine sat alone in her modest living room, holding a framed picture of her son. Her fingers traced the edges of the photo, as if trying to hold on to the boy she once knew. The emptiness around her was heavy, and in that silence, she began to wonder if she had become a burden in his new world. As she gazed at the picture, memories of their closeness played in her mind. The growing distance felt like an ache in her heart. She couldn't shake the feeling that with each passing day, she was being left further behind, her presence in his life shrinking. Determined not to lose the connection, Catherine made several attempts to call him. Each time, the ringing phone was met with silence. The unanswered calls only deepened her sense of isolation, reinforcing the painful truth that her son's world no longer had a place for her. Catherine entered the wedding reception with a mix of hope and anxiety. She wore a modest dress, her heart beating fast, unsure of how she would be received. The luxurious surroundings made her feel out of place, but she tried to carry herself with grace, her eyes searching for a familiar face in the crowd. As she walked through the room, whispers and soft laughter filled the air. Guests, dressed in elegant attire, glanced at her with judgment in their eyes, mocking her simple appearance. She could feel their stares, their disapproval weighing heavily on her as she clutched her small handbag, feeling smaller with each step. Richard, the bride's father, approached Catherine with a polite smile that barely hid his disdain. "It's always interesting to see how some people try to fit into places they don't belong," he said, his words cutting like a knife. Catherine's face flushed with embarrassment, but she stayed silent, the humiliation sinking deep into her heart. Daniel stood silently, watching his mother endure public humiliation, his heart torn between love and shame. From behind him, the whispers and laughter of the crowd felt like a physical weight, pushing him down. He wanted to step forward, to defend her, but fear of what others might think held him back. His hands clenched at his sides, unable to move, the conflict tearing him apart inside. As the reception continued, Daniel felt the impatient glances from the bride's family. Their eyes seemed to ask why he hadn't cut ties with this part of his past. The pressure mounted with every passing moment. He knew they were waiting for him to make a decision, to fully embrace his new life and leave behind everything he once was. The silence between him and his mother had never felt so wide. Inside, Daniel wrestled with his emotions. His love for his mother had been a constant in his life, but now it was at war with his need for acceptance in this new world. The internal conflict grew, the pressure from his surroundings making it harder to choose. Could he keep both parts of his life, or would he have to make the ultimate sacrifice? Catherine found a quiet moment to approach her son. Her heart was heavy with hope and fear, but she couldn't let the day pass without speaking to him. She gently touched his arm, her eyes searching his face for any sign of warmth. Her voice was soft, filled with the weight of everything she hadn't said yet, hoping to bridge the growing gap between them. Daniel barely met her gaze, his expression cold and distant. The affection she had once known seemed lost. He spoke to her with a dismissive tone, his words cutting deep as he asked her to leave early. He justified it by saying it was best for everyone, that she wouldn't fit in with the rest of the guests. Her presence had become an inconvenience in his new life, a reminder of a past he was determined to forget. Catherine felt her heart break in that moment. The pain was sharp, but she swallowed it down, refusing to let her emotions show. She nodded quietly, not wanting to ruin his special day, and turned to leave. As she walked away, the weight of the unspoken words pressed on her chest, but her resolve to protect her son's happiness remained firm, even as her own shattered. Catherine stood alone for a moment, still reeling from her conversation with her son. Her heart ached, and she questioned everything. Suddenly, a gentle hand touched her shoulder. Margaret, a close family friend, had quietly approached. Her expression was kind, and her eyes conveyed understanding. With a soft voice, she reminded Catherine of the sacrifices she had made over the years, the countless times she put her own happiness aside for Daniel's future. Margaret's words were meant to lift Catherine's spirits, but they also stirred something deeper. She spoke about truth, suggesting that maybe it was time to reveal all that had been hidden. The real reasons behind the choices Catherine made, the untold stories of her past struggles. She wasn't trying to push Catherine, but gently encouraged her to think about whether continuing to stay silent was truly the best path. Catherine felt conflicted. She had spent years protecting her son from the harsh realities of their past, believing it was for the best. Now, with Margaret's words echoing in her mind, she wondered if the time had come to tell Daniel the full truth. But still, she hesitated. Was this the right moment? Would it change anything? Her heart wavered, unsure of the next step. As the reception continued, Catherine stood alone, feeling the cold stares of the bride's family. The subtle looks and whispered comments left her isolated, treated like an outsider despite the fact it was her son's wedding. Every interaction seemed forced, and their polite words were laced with disdain. She felt the weight of judgment, the way they dismissed her as if she didn't belong in their world. At one point, as she walked near the edge of the celebration, Catherine overheard a conversation. Richard, the bride's father, stood with Daniel. His voice was low but firm, discussing the future. He hinted that if Daniel truly wanted to secure his position and rise in society, it might be best to sever ties with his old life, his mother included. The idea was clear. To move forward, Daniel had to leave the past behind. Catherine's heart pounded in her chest as she listened from the shadows. The betrayal she feared had begun to take shape. Her son didn't push back or defend her. Instead, his silence hung in the air, a heavy confirmation of the path he might choose. She had sacrificed so much for him, and now, her place in his life felt more fragile than ever. Catherine, having reached her breaking point, finally approached Richard. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was unshaken as she confronted him about the cruel words she had overheard. She demanded to know why he felt entitled to push her son to abandon his own mother for the sake of power. Richard barely looked at her, his expression one of pure disdain. He dismissed her as irrelevant, saying that her place was never in their world. Daniel stood nearby, watching the confrontation unfold. His face reflected the inner turmoil he felt, torn between loyalty to his mother and the new life he was being promised. He saw her pain, but the fear of losing everything his new life represented kept him rooted in place, unable to speak or act. Catherine's heart broke as she saw her son's silence. She had hoped that Daniel would stand up for her, to prove that their bond was unshakable. But his hesitation and lack of action spoke louder than any words. The tension in the air was thick, as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see if the son would finally break free or let himself be chained by the expectations of his new family. Catherine sat in quiet reflection, her thoughts wandering back over the years of sacrifice she had made for her son. She had given everything, her time, her energy, her dreams, all to secure a better life for Daniel. Yet now, as she sat alone, she felt the growing distance between them, a chasm that seemed too wide to bridge. It was a painful realization that despite her efforts, her son had drifted away, drawn into a world where she no longer seemed to belong. As the weight of her thoughts pressed down on her, Catherine realized that in her relentless pursuit of providing for Daniel, she had lost a part of herself. Her identity had been consumed by her role as a mother, and she had forgotten her own desires, her own voice. But now, with the situation spiraling beyond her control, she knew she could no longer remain silent. Something inside her shifted. She had to confront the truth, not just for her son, but for herself. Steeling herself, Catherine prepared mentally for what was to come. She knew that speaking out would not be easy, and the consequences might be severe. But as she stood, she felt a newfound strength rising within her. For too long, she had allowed others to dictate her worth. Now, It was time for her voice to be heard, no matter the cost. As Daniel stood quietly, listening to the harsh words being spoken about his mother, a subtle flicker of doubt began to form within him. The remarks were cruel and dismissive, painting her as insignificant, but something in the back of his mind resisted these thoughts. He started to recall moments from his childhood that didn't align with the narrative being pushed upon him now. His mother had always been there, sacrificing in ways he hadn't fully understood at the time. Memories flooded back, unbidden yet vivid. He remembered seeing his mother come home late at night, exhausted but still managing a tired smile for him. He recalled the day she quietly sold her cherished jewelry to pay for his school trip, brushing it off as if it were nothing. Each memory, once tucked away, now resurfaced with a new significance. It wasn't just small sacrifices. These were the foundations of his success, moments where she had silently supported him without expecting anything in return. The pieces started to fit together. Her long hours at work, the times she missed events not because she didn't care, but because she was working tirelessly to ensure he had opportunities she never did. This realization hit him deeply, making him question everything he had accepted as truth until now. His perception of his mother began to shift, revealing a woman of immense strength and love that had gone unnoticed for too long. The wedding reception is in full swing, with the crowd gathered to hear the toasts and speeches. The joyful clinking of glasses fills the air and laughter echoes around the room. The scene is grand, filled with chandeliers and lavish decorations, celebrating love and unity. Daniel sits with a faint smile, watching the guests enjoy themselves. Yet, a sense of unease lingers in the back of his mind, a shadow of doubt that has grown over the past hours. Catherine moves quietly through the crowd. Her resolve is firm, but her steps are measured, almost hesitant. The years of sacrifice and silence have weighed heavily on her, but now she is determined to break that silence. As the speeches continue, she approaches the stage, her face a mix of determination and nerves. This is her moment, her chance to speak the truth that has been buried for so long. From his seat, Daniel notices his mother stepping toward the stage. His confusion grows as he watches her move with purpose, her figure small against the grandeur of the wedding hall. His brow furrows, not fully understanding what she intends to do. As Catherine takes the microphone, the room quiets, all eyes turning to her. In that silence, Daniel's mind races, trying to grasp the significance of what is about to unfold. Catherine stands before the audience, her hands trembling slightly as she holds the microphone. Her voice wavers at first, but she pushes through, determined to reveal the truth she has kept hidden for so long. She begins by speaking of the small, quiet sacrifices she made over the years, each one for her son's future. With each word, her hands tremble more, and her face reflects the years of hardship she endured in silence. She speaks of the times she sold her jewelry to pay for his education, how she worked late into the night to make sure he had every opportunity for success. Her words hang in the air, and the audience is still, absorbing the gravity of her confession. Catherine's voice grows steadier as she continues, and the room is filled with the weight of her untold story, each detail revealing just how much she gave up for her son's future. Daniel sits frozen, unable to speak. The realization hits him with a force he wasn't prepared for. His mother had given everything, leaving herself with nothing, all for him. The pride he once felt about his success now mixes with deep guilt and sorrow. His eyes are wide, his expression filled with shock and disbelief, as the full weight of her sacrifices becomes clear to him. Daniel's emotions overwhelm him as he stares at his mother, guilt flooding over him. His breath becomes shallow, and his legs weaken. He suddenly drops to his knees before everyone, his designer suit a stark contrast to the raw emotion now pouring out of him. The wedding guests fall silent, their eyes fixed on the once proud man now crumbling under the weight of his remorse. With tears streaming down his face, Daniel begins to speak, his voice shaky and filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I never understood everything you did for me. I've been so blind." His words are broken, but they carry the depth of his sorrow. His blue eyes, usually sharp and confident, now reflect deep pain. The room is frozen, the tension between him and his mother palpable as the guests look on, unsure of how to react. Catherine stands motionless, watching her son with a mix of sadness and understanding. The pain in her eyes is evident, but so is the love she still carries for him. The room remains silent, the tension building as everyone waits for what will come next, the air thick with emotion as Daniel's apology echoes through the hall. As Daniel turns to his mother, desperate to reconcile, his voice faltering with emotion, Elizabeth's father steps forward, his face stern and unyielding. He announces that the wedding will not continue if Daniel chooses to embrace his mother over the bride. The room falls into an uneasy silence, with all eyes on Daniel as the weight of the impossible choice crashes down upon him. The tension in the air is almost suffocating, as Daniel looks helplessly between his mother and the woman he loves. Elizabeth, standing beside her father, her blue eyes filled with hurt and confusion, watches as her father issues the ultimatum. She can feel the walls closing in as her future crumbles before her. Torn between loyalty to her family and her love for Daniel, she takes a small step back, her hands trembling. Her wedding gown, once a symbol of joy, now feels like a prison. The situation spirals as Elizabeth's father turns to leave, guiding his daughter away. Daniel's heart pounds as he realizes that in this moment, he may lose everything. His mother, standing quietly to the side, her gaze steady yet sorrowful, knows the decision will break her son's heart no matter which path he chooses. The room is thick with tension, and as the bride and her father prepare to exit, the sense of finality hangs over everyone. As Elizabeth watches her father walk away, something inside her shifts. She steps forward, breaking away from the expectations that have always confined her. Her voice trembles at first, but then it grows stronger. She tells everyone that she cannot continue living under her family's values, that her love for Daniel and her admiration for Catherine's sacrifices have changed her perspective. Her father pauses, turning back to look at her in disbelief, but Elizabeth stands firm. Daniel looks up, his heart pounding, as Elizabeth turns her gaze toward his mother. With a sense of resolve, she walks over to Catherine, her expression one of newfound understanding and respect. She reaches out to embrace her, a gesture that speaks louder than words. The entire room is silent, watching the moment unfold. Catherine, surprised yet deeply moved, slowly returns the embrace, her eyes softening as she realizes that this act of love and respect has healed a rift she never expected to mend. As Elizabeth pulls away from the hug, she turns to her father and calls out his behavior in front of everyone. She tells him that it's time to let go of the shallow values that have dictated their lives for too long. Her father, taken aback, stares at his daughter in stunned silence. Elizabeth then takes Daniel's hand, smiling warmly at him, and declares that the wedding will go on, but only if it is built on love and truth, not appearances or societal pressure. The room erupts into applause, and for the first time, hope returns to Daniel's eyes as he squeezes Elizabeth's hand. They both look at Catherine, who nods in quiet approval, the future now filled with possibility. Standing together at the altar once more, Catherine, Daniel, and Elizabeth form a united front, their hands linked in solidarity. The air is filled with a renewed sense of peace and love, as the earlier tensions have dissolved. Daniel, looking from his mother to his bride, makes a vow in front of everyone present. He promises never to let pride, status, or ego come between them again. His voice is steady, filled with sincerity and determination, and both women smile softly, knowing that this moment marks a new chapter in their lives. The wedding resumes, but this time, there is no trace of the previous discord. Instead, it feels lighter, more genuine. The guests, once awkward and silent, now join in the celebration with a new spirit of joy. Laughter fills the air, and the smiles exchanged between family members are no longer strained. Richard, standing off to the side, watches his daughter with a mixture of surprise and respect. Though he does not say a word, his expression softens as he begins to accept the changes happening before him. Elizabeth glances in his direction, a silent understanding passing between them. Years later, Daniel and Elizabeth are shown living simpler, more authentic lives, with Catherine a constant presence in their home. The once strained relationships have grown stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect and love. Daniel often reflects on how close he came to losing it all, and every day he is grateful for the lessons learned. As they gather for a quiet family dinner, the warmth of their bond is evident in every glance and gesture. The past has been reconciled, and their future shines brightly ahead, filled with hope and new beginnings.
This story moved me deeply, reminding me of the quiet strength found in the most humble of hearts and how the truth, when revealed, has the power to change lives in the most unexpected ways. How did you come across this story? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And if you're interested in more unforgettable cases, click on the video on your screen. See you there.